I would like to recall that the duration of interactive dialogues is 1 hour and 30 minutes. However, depending on the number of delegations registered for each interactive dialogue and time permitting, the Vice Presidents and I myself will determine whether we can exceed the duration of 1 hour and a half for some dialogues, so as to give the floor to more delegations. I invite the delegations on the list to be ready. Interpretation in Dari will be available as an exception during this meeting, so as to make it more accessible to those following the interactive dialogue in Afghanistan. The interpretation is available via the floor channel. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, it is my honor to welcome Ms. Nada al-Nashif, Deputy Commissioner for Human Rights, who will make the opening statement. Also, please allow me to welcome our distinguished speakers. Mr. Richard Bennett, Special Rapporteur on the Situation of Human Rights in Afghanistan. Mr. Maibullah Tayed, the Counselor from the Permanent Mission of Afghanistan. Ms. Zara, that is a pseudonym, a teacher and survivor of child marriage living in Afghanistan, who will address us via video message. Ms. Fatima Amiri, an activist for education for Afghan girls, a student and survivor of an attack against an education center in Kabul, and Ms. Mariam Mitra, a researcher, poet, and women's rights activist in Afghanistan. The speakers list will be closed in 15 minutes, and I have the honor to give the floor to the Deputy Commissioner for Human Rights for her statement.
Thank you, distinguished President, Your Excellencies, colleagues and friends. I'm pleased to represent the High Commissioner at this enhanced interactive dialogue and to address this Council on a matter of urgent and ongoing concern: the state of access to justice and protection in Afghanistan, particularly for women and girls. Since the Taliban seized power in August 2021, justice in Afghanistan has undergone a dramatic and deeply troubling transformation. The legal framework established during the Republic of Afghanistan era has been effectively suspended or dismantled, with new structures put in place. They include the reconfiguration of the judiciary, including the removal of female judges, the dissolution of the Office of the Attorney General, restricted space for defense lawyers and the rights of the accused, and the removal of key protection mechanisms. In short, legal and institutional safeguards essential to upholding the rule of law have either been removed or severely compromised. These, along with the very wide range of discriminatory measures introduced by the de facto authorities, have had a profound impact on the population of Afghanistan, in particular women and girls. Last October, the Council mandated the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Afghanistan to prepare a report on access to justice and protection for women and girls. This report addresses the compounded effects of multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination and presents an important baseline study on the type of obstacles that women and girls face in relation to access to justice and protection in Afghanistan. It finds that across the country, while Afghans are encountering significant barriers in seeking legal recourse or redress for harms endured, the situation is particularly grave for women and girls. Their access to justice has become practically non-existent. Without a mahram, women and girls cannot access a lawyer, courts or other institutions, and cannot seek protection or reparation from harm. By virtue of this system, women who are victims of domestic abuse, whose mahrams may also be the perpetrators of violence or exclusion, are rendered invisible, with no real hope of protection. We witness an institutionalization of the most extreme forms of gender-based discrimination and segregation. Women and girls have been systematically excluded from public life and to a large extent deprived of their most basic human rights, including access to secondary and higher education, healthcare, employment, freedom of movement and freedom of expression. Women and girls' access to justice is so challenging, whether in the formal or the informal justice system, that it amounts to barely any access at all. This situation is especially devastating for those with intersecting and marginalized identities. And I mean women and girls from ethnic and religious minorities, women with disabilities, and from female-headed households who face heightened risks of violence, exclusion and deprivation. They are doubly victimized in a system that already considers women and girls less deserving of rights and dignity. It is important to acknowledge that these challenges are not new. Long before the Taliban's takeover, Afghanistan's justice system suffered from structural weaknesses, with entrenched corruption, limited institutional capacity and widespread reliance on informal dispute resolution mechanisms, particularly in the rural areas. Impunity for violations committed by both national and international actors further eroded public trust and left many victims, once again, especially women and girls, without effective protection or recourse. We hope, therefore, that today's discussion will help refocus global attention on the rights of Afghan women and girls, enhance robust and sustained political engagement by the international community, along with financial support for the reforms. And I am especially pleased to welcome the Afghan women joining us today to participate in the dialogue from Afghanistan and from around the world. It is critical to ensure, dear ladies, that your voices remain at the center of this Council's deliberations. Excellencies, the credibility of our collective commitment to human rights, and especially to the fundamental rights of women and girls, is measured by our responses in situations as grave as this one. Let us act with resolve, in coordination and with urgency. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to Mr. Richard Bennett for his presentation. You have the floor.
Mr. President, Madam Deputy High Commissioner, Excellencies, delegates, colleagues and friends, I welcome and pay tribute to the women human rights defenders who will speak here today. As a Council, I ask that you hear them and the people of Afghanistan, whose demands for justice, protection, support and solidarity are unwavering. It is our responsibility not only to listen, but also to act. My new report examines access to justice and protection for women and girls. From my extensive consultations and from submissions from almost 200 women inside Afghanistan, it's clear that the meaning of justice can vary among and between Afghans and is shaped by different backgrounds, identities and lived experience. It involves not only legal accountability, but also the restoration of rights, access to essential services and the creation of conditions in which women, girls and all Afghans can live with dignity and self-determination. There is, however, a shared understanding that injustice, however understood, and the harm it causes is profoundly felt and enduring. Today, under Taliban policies, access to justice and protection in Afghanistan has been severely compromised. It is virtually unattainable. The de facto authorities have dismantled legal and institutional frameworks and abolished crucial protection mechanisms, while support networks have either collapsed or been forced underground. The Taliban's transformation of the justice system weaponizes the legal, judicial and social order to oppress women and girls, their allies and LGBT persons. It is designed to enforce, entrench and sustain the group's repressive and misogynistic ideology. While all women and girls bear the brunt, those with intersecting minority and marginalized identities are especially affected. This system of gender persecution amounts to crimes against humanity and is well characterized as gender apartheid. Any talk of normalization in this context is vastly premature. Mr. President, members of the Council, I invite you to consider the situation beyond this latest report. My 10 reports to this Council and the General Assembly since 2022 together chart an alarming trajectory of deepening discrimination and repression of the people of Afghanistan, especially women and girls, and the situation is continuing to deteriorate. Whether through ever-expanding restrictions, increasing harsh enforcement of repressive moral codes, shrinking media and civic space, the alarming increase in corporal punishment, or continuing reprisals against former members of the security forces. Against this backdrop, I'm increasingly alarmed by any framing of Afghanistan as a kind of lost cause, where nothing can be done to change the situation. This is not the case, as the people of Afghanistan are showing daily. I ask, when Afghanistan's future is discussed, who are the key stakeholders? The answer is, and must be, the people of Afghanistan themselves, including women, girls, and youth in all their diversity, both inside the country and in exile. It is they who will build a more inclusive, equal, and stable country. Mr. President, I also ask whether the international community, including this Council, is using all the tools at its disposal to support the people of Afghanistan, to counter creeping normalization in the face of no improvements on the ground, and to challenge the Taliban's institutionalized oppression and persecution. The answer is no. More can and must be done, including strengthening and expanding accountability measures that will tackle the pervasive impunity that continues. But there is no panacea, and effective action is needed to improve the situation on the ground now. I continue to advocate for an all-tools approach, a range of interventions that together exceed the sum of their parts and maximize the potential for the emergence of a safe, stable and inclusive Afghanistan. This should include prioritizing support for Afghan-led civil society, especially women-led NGOs, providing humanitarian assistance, funding education and economic empowerment initiatives for women and girls on the ground, and assisting states who are hosting Afghan refugees. It also includes supporting men and boys, including through initiatives that empower them as positive agents of change. We, the international community, must stand firmly with the brave people of Afghanistan who continue to risk everything in pursuit of justice, dignity and peace. I thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Je donne maintenant la parole à...
And now give the floor to the next speaker. You have the floor.
President, thank you. Let me start by thanking Deputy High Commissioner and expressing my happiness for presence of women and girls from Afghanistan for today's discussion. We thank the Special Rapporteur, Mr. Richard Bennett, for his latest report and continued commitment. The report paints a stark but accurate picture of the situation in Afghanistan, one that Afghanistan civil society, especially women, have been urging this Council to confront with urgency. Since the Taliban's military takeover, Afghanistan has undergone not a reform of justice, but a dismantling of it. As detailed in the report, the Taliban de facto authorities have abolished the constitution, nullified all laws protecting women and children, and replaced the legal framework with unpublished edicts issued arbitrarily at provincial or national levels. Courts are staffed entirely by Taliban-appointed male judges, often without legal training, enforcing a harsh interpretation of Sharia that lacks consistency and due process. Women and girls have been removed from every layer of the justice system, as judges, prosecutors, lawyers and complainants. The Afghanistan Independent Bar Association has been dissolved. There are no licensed female lawyers in the country today. Police units handling gender-based violence have been dismantled, and complaints of abuse, rape or forced marriage are either ignored or lead to reprisal against the victims. The requirement of a mahram, a male guardian, to access courts, travel, even appear in public has become a tool for control, silencing women by cutting them off from any form of remedy. Mr. President, Since February 2025, the Taliban have escalated their repression. They have banned women from attending private medical training institutions and trained to revoke licenses of NGOs that employ women. In March, the so-called Ministry of Promotion of Virtue and Prevention of Vice began enforcing bans on women's voices in public broadcasts, extending censorship to include female poets, singers and educators. The so-called courts have overturned divorces granted under the previous government, forcing women back into obvious marriages or charging them with adultery for remarrying. Peaceful protests have been met with violence. In late February, a group of women protesting education bans in Kabul was dispersed with gunfire and several were detained and disclosed locations. More than 40 civil society activists, including ethnic minority leaders, have been arbitrarily arrested since February, with many reportedly held with charge. The Taliban's General Director of Intelligence continued to carry out home raids, device searches and enforce disappearances, especially targeting those suspected of dissent. Mr. President, these actions are not administrative failure. They are the core of an ideological project to enforce a gender-segregated authoritarian regime. As the last Human Rights Council resolution on Afghanistan rightly stated, this is an institutionalized system of discrimination and exclusion. As the Special Rapporteur emphasized, it may amount to crimes against humanity, including persecution on the ground of gender. Mr. President, the international community cannot continue to express concern without consequences. We fully support the Special Rapporteur's recommendation to establish a new UN investigative mechanism, independent but complementary to the current mandate. It must be empowered to document violations, collect and preserve evidence, identify perpetrators and support avenues for justice, including through the International Criminal Court and other accountability forms. Mr. President, we also stress that any engagement with the Taliban must be strictly conditioned on verifiable human rights benchmarks. This includes immediate reopening of schools for girls of all ages, removal of madam restrictions, reinstatement of women's rights to work and move freely, and the restoration of a functioning right respecting legal system. Empty rhetoric from the Taliban cannot substitute for measurable change. Support for Afghanistan civil society, especially women-led organizations and excited legal professionals, must be sustained and expanded. We urge all members to act, support the creation of an investigative mechanism, strengthen international accountability, conditions all engagement on human rights, and stand firmly and urgently with the people of Afghanistan, especially its women and girls. I thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Je donne maintenant la parole.
I now give the floor to Mrs. Zhar for your presentation by video message.
Honorable members of the Council, my name is Zahra. I speak to you as a mother, a teacher, and a woman from Afghanistan who has lived through two Taliban regimes and 20 years of hope and heartbreak. I was 13 years old when I was forced into marriage. That was the year 2000, during the first Taliban rule. The Taliban were going door to door searching for unmarried girls. My family was afraid to protect me. They arranged my marriage to my cousin. He was 20. I was still a child. I cried. My mother cried. She knew it would be painful, but believed it was safer than what the Taliban might do. I had been one of the best students in my class. All I wanted was to stay in school, but at 14 I became a mother. While other girls were holding books, I was holding a baby. My husband did not allow me to continue my education, but I never gave up. I studied late at night and worked during the day, raising 5 children. Then I became a widow. I had no partner and no support. I had to be both mother and father to my children. When the Taliban were gone, Afghanistan had a period of hope. I earned my master's degree. I taught at university, became a journalist, worked for the government, and used my voice to support women. I believed we were building something better. Then, in August 2021, everything disappeared. My hopes, my job, my daughter's right to education. For 17 days, I hid with my children. Armed men came to our home with false accusations. My family helped me move from place to place. My children stopped laughing. We spoke only in whispers. There was no protection, no justice. One day I was in a car near Taliban checkpoint. Women were pulled out if they weren't wearing black chador and face veil. It didn't matter. They were with husband. Officials from the Ministry for the Promotion of Virtue sat nearby with whips. They beat women on the legs and forced them to sit in the dirt for a lesson on hijab. I watched as the men sat back in silence. Some cried. 2 women refused to sit. They sat their ground. Whips came down. Guns were raised. Women screamed. That day, it was not only the women who were punished. Our whole society dignity was crushed. This is what it means when there is no justice, no system that hears us, no one to turn to, no freedom to walk outside without a mahram, no schools, no courts, no protection. The injustice continues through generations. In 2021, my daughter was 19. She dreamed of finishing school, but Taliban members began pressuring families to marry off their daughters. They sent letters offering money instead of using force, but the message was the same. Girls do not belong in school. I faced the same nightmare my mother did. I made the same impossible decision. I married off my daughter, not because I wanted to, but because I was trying to protect her. We were lucky. I chose a kind man. She is not unhappy, but many girls are not so fortunate. They are married against their will, taken out of school and left without a future. The trauma continues. Still, I fight. My younger daughters now study in secret. Our home has become a classroom. They learn quietly, always afraid, but full of hope. To this council, I ask, where is justice for Afghan women? Where is protection for girls who want to learn? Where is the action the world once promised? We are not asking for privilege, only for rights, basic rights every human being should have. If the world stays silent, the cycle of fear and forced choices will continue. But if you stand with us, we can begin to break it. My daughter's life already mirrors mine, but I will not let the same fate reach my younger daughters. I will keep teaching them. I will keep fighting for them. I believe in them, and I ask you to believe in them too. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you very much, and I give the floor to Mrs. Fatima Miri for your presentation. Please go ahead.
In the name of Allah, distinguished delegates, esteemed guests, and all those committed to the values of peace, dignity, and human rights. Today, I speak not only with words, but with the weight of the stories, my own and those of many who cannot be here. I'm here to share a truth that must be heard. I'm just an example of many girls and women in Afghanistan who have been denied justice. I'm someone who has felt every kind of pain that girls in my country experience. I'm the girl whose school was closed. I still remember the day when they closed my school, how painful it was. I'm the student whose university was closed. After losing my eye and my ear, with all this pain that I had, I participated to my exam to study at university, to show them they cannot stop me, to protest against them, but they closed universities. I'm the young woman who could no longer work in her own country. I was working and supporting my family, but they took this right from me. In my view, justice have equality, to not have to fight for basic rights. After losing my eye and my ear with all this pain that I had, but they closed everything for me. Yes, I'm still standing, still speaking, still dreaming, not just for myself, but for every girl still waiting for her voice to be heard. I'm a girls' education activist. Why? Because I feel every pain that they are experiencing right now. Because when the Taliban came in Afghanistan, they closed my mother's school, and she couldn't continue her education. This time, when they came, they closed mine. And I cannot let them to do it to the next generation. Despite every door that has been closed to us, we continue to learn, in secret, in the dark, online, through whispers, through book passed from hands to hand like precious treasures. Today, I do not ask for sympathy. I ask for solidarity, for support, for action. Speaking about justice and protection is not enough. We need actions. Support for underground schools, protections for those fighting for their right to learn, making opportunities, amplification of voices that are being silenced every day. Education is everyone's right and shouldn't be given to a few like special privilege. And at least if the UN or other countries cannot do anything to change the policy of the Taliban, then at least they shouldn't join them. Please don't recognize Taliban. Let us ensure that the next generation of Afghan girls doesn't have to fight simply to go to school. Let us ensure that when she writes her name, the word doesn't erase it. I don't want to transfer the darkness to the next generation. I want to transfer knowledge. So please be with us, and we need actions. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Je donne maintenant la parole.
And I give the floor to Mrs. Mariam Mitra for your presentation. Please go ahead.
Excellencies, I stand before you today not only to speak on behalf of women in Afghanistan, but also to bear witness to the systematic elimination of their presence, their rights, and their dignity. When talking about justice, I speak from personal experience. As someone who lived through the first Taliban regime and was denied the right to an education simply because I was a girl. I lived through a time when learning was a quiet act of defiance and teaching another girl was an act of resistance. Let me be clear, women and men of Afghanistan are not passive victims. They are resisting in various forms at extraordinary personal risk. They have marched in the streets knowing they might face beatings or arrests, with no fair judicial system to turn to nor institution to protect them. They have composed poetry and sang songs, turning words into acts of defiance. They have taught girls in underground classrooms, risking imprisonment but keeping hope and knowledge alive. Many have been detained, tortured, disappeared, and killed, and yet still they continue to resist. Today, I do not bring only my voice into this room. Still, I also carry with me the voices of countless women, and especially the voices of oppressed writers, poets, and storytellers who can no longer speak freely or whose words remain trapped behind closed doors and on silenced pages. Let me share with you a poem I composed in Farsi in honor of the resilience and resistance of the women of Afghanistan. ای دختران خسته شهر سکوت و شب، آیا در این قلمرو تاریک می شود به ماهتاب کاذب آن سوی پنجره دل بست، یا در پرتو نور تک ستاره نومید شعر خواند، واژه ها صدایم را باور نمی کنند، انگار مردم و جام های سنگی سکوت از صدای من تهی است. اگرچه سال هاست حنجره روزگار صدایم را انکار می کند، اگرچه قرن هاست با صدای زخمیم چیغ می زنم، های باورم کنید من حضور کاذب یک سایه نیستم. This is the spirit we must protect, this is the voice we must amplify, and this is why your action, our collective action, is so urgently needed. As someone who has known the silence of injustice firsthand, I urge this Council to take the following concrete steps to enhance justice and protection for Afghan women and girls. First, formally recognize the Taliban's policies as gender apartheid and begin the process of establishing it as crime under international law. Second, ensure that women's rights remain at the center of all diplomatic engagements with de facto authorities. No political negotiation should take place without women at the table, and no agreement should be concluded if it ignores their rights. Third, support organizations that provide protection and offer judicial support, especially for women and other vulnerable groups, including scholars, activists, educators, and students, and expand safe pathways for them through humanitarian corridors, scholarships, and relocation programs. Fourth, increase support for grassroots women's organizations, many of which continue to work in hiding. Their voices must shape our responses and guide our actions. Finally, demand accountability. Impunity must never be the reward for gender persecution. The world is watching. History will judge not only those who perpetrate these crimes, but also those who remain silent in the face of such systematic oppression. I thank you.
Merci.
Thank you very much. I now invite those delegations who wish to put questions to the speakers and make comments in their statements. I'd remind you that the speaking time is limited to 1 minute 30 seconds for each statement, and I'll begin with the distinguished representative of Iceland on behalf of a group of countries.
Mr. President, I speak on behalf of the Nordic Baltic states. We remain deeply concerned about the grave human rights violations and abuses, including the widespread and institutionalized system of discrimination and oppression against women and girls in Afghanistan. Systematic gender oppression has been further expanded and institutionalized, with women facing restrictions, including by removal from the justice sector. Today, the judiciary does not have any female judges or prosecutors, and no officially registered female lawyers, leaving women and girls with fewer safe channels to report violations and abuses, restricting their access to justice and protection. Furthermore, dismantling of essential legal protections and institutions safeguarding children's rights has led to a system where girls and boys are treated as adults. This not only violates their rights, it exacerbates the vulnerability of children and youth and their ability to seek justice. Afghanistan youth must be recognized as key stakeholders. Protecting their rights and supporting their participation will be vital for building a more inclusive, peaceful and representative Afghanistan. We call on the de facto authorities to fulfill their responsibilities to international human rights treaties ratified by Afghanistan, including by reversing policies and practices that violate these obligations. Special Rapporteur, how can we support participation of civil society and youth in protecting the rights of women and girls in the current context in Afghanistan? I thank you.
Merci. La liste des auteurs.
Thank you very much. The list of speakers is now closed, and I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the European Union.
In particular, for bringing the voices of the women of Afghanistan to the HRC. The human rights and humanitarian situation in Afghanistan remains catastrophic. The EU condemns the systematic and systemic human rights violations and abuses. We particularly condemn extreme gender-based discrimination by the Taliban against women and girls, which may amount to gender persecution, a crime against humanity under the Rome Statute, to which Afghanistan is a party. The EU reaffirms its support for the international criminal justice system, for the fight against impunity, for preserving the ICC's independence and integrity. The Taliban has reshaped Afghanistan's legal system to serve their ideological and misogynistic model of governance. We call on the Taliban to render their policies and practices consistent with the international human rights obligations of Afghanistan. Furthermore, many Afghans are affected by entrenched harms that arise to the intersection of multiple forms of discrimination. The EU calls for the protection of the rights of persons belonging to minorities, including ethnic and religious minorities, such as the Hazara, as well as LGBTI persons. Question, what are the viable ways to end the cycle of impunity and ensure accountability for perpetrators of violations and abuses inside Afghanistan, especially in relation to violations against women and girls? Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you very much. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Pakistan on behalf of the OIC.
President, the OIC Group thanks the Deputy High Commissioner for her presentation and takes note of the Special Rapporteur's report. We reiterate our consistent concerns over the humanitarian, human rights and socio-economic conditions in Afghanistan. We remain particularly troubled by the state of human rights for women and girls in Afghanistan. Consistent with our long-standing position, we urge the de facto Afghan authorities to uphold the rights of all Afghans, especially women and girls, by ensuring access to education and participation in the workforce. Islamic teachings are clear on these issues. We also emphasize the importance of establishing protections for individuals belonging to ethnic, religious and cultural minorities in accordance with both Islamic law and Afghanistan's international commitments. The OIC Group reiterates its concern that critical humanitarian funding is declining, risking the well-being of millions. The international community must intensify its humanitarian efforts to provide essential support to the most vulnerable. We also stress that using Afghan territory for terrorist activities threatens the rights of people in Afghanistan and beyond, and this must be stemmed by the de facto Afghan authorities. Finally, while reiterating the OIC Group's clear position, we regret that several parts of the SR's report continue to delve over divisive issues such as SOGI. We consider such references unnecessary and counterproductive. I thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole.
Thank you very much. I give the floor now to Unifem.
Thank you, Mr. President. UN Women welcomes the Special Rapporteur's report and its clear recognition of the Taliban's justice system as a mechanism of gender-based oppression. Since August 2021, Afghan women and girls have been systematically stripped of their rights. The dismantling of legal protection, the exclusion of women from the judiciary, and the enforcement of restrictive edicts have created a justice system that denies them safety, dignity, and redress. This system of injustice is reinforced by exclusion from public life. Women and girls are barred from education beyond grade 6, denied access to most employment, and erased from political and decision-making spaces. Their participation in the workforce is minimal, and their access to financial services remains severely limited. The prevalence of violence against women remains alarmingly high. Despite these challenges, Afghan women and women-led organizations continue to demonstrate remarkable courage and resilience. Many are finding ways to advocate for their rights and pursue alternative pathways to justice, including through community-based mechanisms. We echo the Special Rapporteur's calls to establish clear human rights benchmarks for engagement with the de facto authorities to ensure Afghan women's equal, meaningful, and safe participation in all discussions regarding Afghanistan, and to scale up sustained support for women-led organizations. Justice for Afghan women and girls must be central to any future vision for an inclusive Afghanistan. I thank you.
Merci.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to UNICEF.
Mr. President, UNICEF welcomes the report of the Special Rapporteur and this interactive dialogue. Since 2022, UNICEF has regularly alerted this Council on the dire situation of child rights in Afghanistan, especially girls, and today, yet again, expresses alarm at the violations of the rights of children, especially girls in Afghanistan, and at the systemic discrimination against girls, including their lack of access to justice. Today, 2.2 million girls have been excluded from secondary school, with the number growing each academic year. Women and girls also continue to be barred from attending higher education, which now includes medical training institutes, further limiting access to healthcare for women. We urge the de facto authorities to comply with their legal obligations toward children in Afghanistan, especially girls. This includes immediately lifting the ban on girls' education and resuming learning for all children. It also includes ensuring access to an effective remedy for all girls whose rights are violated. Thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of New Zealand.
Thank you, Mr. President. New Zealand thanks all the speakers for their presentations, and we thank the Special Rapporteur for his comprehensive report. We strongly support the mandate of the Special Rapporteur and his critical work in ensuring accountability for human rights violations and abuses. As the speakers' presentations and Special Rapporteur's report demonstrate, the human rights situation in Afghanistan continues to deteriorate. New Zealand remains gravely concerned by the ongoing systematic repression of fundamental freedoms for women and girls, including severe limitations on their access to justice and right to equal participation. The Taliban must fundamentally change its approach to human rights and must comply fully with Afghanistan's obligations under international human rights law. The Taliban must rescind all edicts and decrees that curtail these fundamental freedoms and human rights. women and girls must be allowed access to secondary and tertiary education and work. Their freedom of movement must be respected, and they must be allowed to participate fully in public life without interference and harassment. Their access to justice must be restored. Mr. President, the situation is profoundly alarming. New Zealand continues to stand with the brave people of Afghanistan. Thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Albania.
Thank you, Mr. President. Albania thanks the Special Rapporteur for his comprehensive report on the situation of human rights in Afghanistan, with a particular focus on access to justice and protection for women and girls. We commend the Special Rapporteur's unwavering commitment to documenting the grave and systematic violation of human rights under Taliban's rule. His report provides a sobering yet essential account of institutionalized gender-based discrimination and persecution that Afghan women and girls face daily. The report's findings on dismantling of legal protection, exclusion of women from the justice system, and the use of justice system as a tool of repression are particular alarm. Mr. President, Albania condemns the policies of gender persecution that have stripped Afghan women of their most basic rights: education, employment, freedom of movement, access to justice. My country has taken concrete steps to support Afghan women and refugees. Since 2021, we have welcomed over 4,000 Afghan families, providing them with shelter, healthcare, education and integration support. Albania stands with people of Afghanistan, especially women and girls, and will support international accountability mechanisms, including those addressing gender-based persecution. I thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole au distingué
Thank you. I give the floor to Spain.
Thank you, President. Spain, align itself with the statement of the European Union, would like to thank the report from the Special Rapporteur and the other speakers. More than focusing on describing a situation of violation and generalized operation of women's rights, would very much like to focus on two particular points. First, pay tribute to the dignity and resistance of Afghan women and the organizations who face huge challenges but continue to speak out to claim their rights. And secondly, underline that we cannot remain indifferent before what is happening. Spain remains unwavering its commitment to Afghan women and believes that significant measures can be taken and the International Criminal Court and the ICJ to put an end to the violation of women's rights. We note the report of the Special Rapporteur and think that this mandate can be strengthened through an independent investigation mechanism which would contribute to guaranteeing accountability for crimes committed in Afghanistan. Mr. Bennett, how can we ensure the inclusion of Afghan women in discussions on the future of their country and the fight against impunity? Thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole à la distinguée.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Slovenia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Slovenia aligns with the EU statement, and we thank the Special Rapporteur for his latest report. As we approach the four-year milestone since the Taliban enforced the widespread, systematic and institutionalized system of gender-based discrimination and exclusion, the situation continues to deteriorate further. All measures that directly and indirectly hinder women's and girls' access to justice are unacceptable and deplorable. As the reform of Afghanistan's domestic accountability mechanisms remains highly unlikely, we share the view that the alleviation of the situation of Afghan women and girls requires external facilitation. We support the efforts of the international community to address these shortcomings through international accountability mechanisms. Finally, Mr. Special Rapporteur, we strongly resonate with the words of an Afghan woman cited in the report that justice isn't limited only to seeking legal recourse and services. For Afghan women, it often reflects their goals and aspirations to fully enjoy their fundamental freedoms and protections, equal and fair treatment, to be seen and heard, and to be safe. Slovenia will continue towards the safety, dignity and redress for all Afghan women and girls. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Austria.
Thank you, Mr. President. Austria aligns itself with the EU statement. We thank the Special Rapporteur for his report. The Taliban's ban on education at medical institutions for female students is deeply alarming, further depriving women and girls of their right to education and weakening the healthcare system. We are further appalled by the increase in gender-based violence, forced and early marriage, and cases of women detainees being sexually abused and assaulted by the Taliban de facto authorities. We are also concerned by the widespread and systematic human rights violations carried out in Afghanistan, including extrajudicial killings, arbitrary arrests and detention, enforced disappearances, and acts of torture against former government officials, security personnel, journalists, and human rights defenders. We urge the de facto authorities to immediately stop public executions and abolish the death penalty by establishing, as a first step, an official moratorium. Austria reiterates its call on the de facto authorities to abide by Afghanistan's international human rights obligations, including under the CEDAW, and to uphold the principles of non-discrimination and the rule of law. I thank you.
Merci, je donne la parole.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of North Macedonia.
Mr. President, Afghanistan is experiencing a grave human rights crisis. Since the Taliban's return to power in 2021, women and girls have been systematically excluded from public life. Legal protection has been dismantled, independent institutions dissolved, and access to justice has nearly vanished. Today, there are no women judges or registered lawyers. The elimination of violence against women law has been suspended. Specialized courts and shelters have been closed. Women cannot appear in court without a male guardian. And those who report violence risk arrest, public punishment, or worse. What remains is not a justice system, but a system of repression, one that punishes women for seeking safety, denies them education, and strips them of voice and dignity. Yet, even under these circumstances, Afghan women continue to resist, quietly, courageously, and often at great personal risk. They are defending rights, supporting one another, and demanding international attention. We must listen to them. We must support women-led organizations, protect those at risk, and hold perpetrators accountable. Justice must be more than a word. It must be a promise kept. I thank you, Mr. President.
Merci.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Croatia.
Mr. President, Croatia aligns with the EU statement. We thank all the panelists and Special Rapporteur for his report. Afghanistan is experiencing a profound human rights crisis that has reshaped the lives of its people, especially women and girls, who have been deprived of their fundamental rights and erased from public life. The report undeniably shows that these deprivations are systematic and backed by the legal and justice system controlled by the de facto authorities and designed to enforce and sustain repressive and misogynistic ideology. We strongly condemn these practices that may amount to crimes against humanity. We are deeply saddened to hear about the lack of legal and institutional frameworks and protection mechanisms for women and girls, and especially victims of sexual and gender-based violence. They are left without any support and often forced to return to their abusers. Croatia calls on the de facto authorities to abide by the obligations under the CEDAW and the CRC, to which Afghanistan is a party. We also strongly condemn the reinstation of corporal punishment, including public flogging and executions, and urge de facto authorities to introduce an immediate moratorium on the death penalty and with a view to its abolition. Mr. Special Rapporteur, how can the international community ensure the representative, equal and safe participation of Afghan women in all discussions concerning the country's future? I thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Luxembourg. Thank you, Mr. President. Luxembourg aligns with the statement by the European Union. We thank the Deputy High Commissioner for the introduction and the Special Rapporteur for the presentation of his report, as well as all of the panelists for their contributions. We pay tribute to the Afghan women present in this room and on our screens, whose voices have been reduced to silence in their own country, However, without them, there can be no peace or sustainable development in Afghanistan. The human rights situation in Afghanistan remains extremely concerning. Luxembourg condemns widespread human rights violations, especially the systematic persecution of Afghan women and girls, which is persecuted as a crime against humanity under the Rome Statute. Luxembourg reaffirms its support for the international criminal justice system. It reaffirmed this by aligning with the referral of the situation in Afghanistan to the ICC alongside 5 other states. We call on the Taliban to abide by obligations from international conventions to which the country is party. We also call for the protection of minority members, including ethnic and religious minorities, as well as LGBTI persons. Mr. Special Rapporteur, Luxembourg supports your recommendation 111A on establishing a comprehensive accountability mechanism. We are convinced that the gravity of the situation requires a firmer response from the international community, which should open the way for accountability for the Afghan people. Thank you. Thank you, and I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Italy.
Monsieur le Président, distinguished Deputy Commissioner, Italy aligned itself with the EU statement and thanks the Special Rapporteur for his report. We are appalled by the ongoing deterioration of the human rights situation in Afghanistan, particularly the systematic and the institutionalized oppression of women and girls. They continue to face unacceptable restrictions on their rights and freedoms, including the dismantling of legal protections, exclusion from public life, and imposition of discriminatory practices. While underscoring the need for justice and accountability, Italy notes with concern the assessment that such systematic oppression may amount to a gender persecution, a crime against humanity under the Rome Statute to which Afghanistan is a party. We are also deeply concerned about the situation of children deprived of basic rights and services, and of women and girls from minorities and marginalized groups. Italy remains steadfast in its commitment to addressing this dire human rights situation. In that regard, Mr. Special Rapporteur, how can the international community most effectively support Afghan women and girls and promote tangible improvements in their full enjoyment of human rights? I thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Pakistan.
Mr. President, Pakistan thanks the Deputy High Commissioner and the Special Rapporteur for their presentations. While taking note of the Special Rapporteur's report, we reiterate our repeated concerns regarding the humanitarian crisis and ongoing human rights violations in the country. Pakistan maintains a clear stance on the importance of safeguarding and advancing human rights for all, with particular emphasis on the rights of women and girls. We acknowledge the Special Rapporteur's concerns over the exclusion of women from the Afghan judicial system and its negative impact on the enjoyment of human rights by the people of Afghanistan, especially women and girls. We underline that women empowerment remains vital for holistic socio-economic development of any society, and that the interim authorities in Afghanistan must fulfill their obligations under international law in this regard. Earlier this year, Pakistan organized an international conference focused on girls' education, reaffirming it as a fundamental right in line with Islamic teachings and international human rights law. Mr. President, Pakistan has hosted Afghan people with unmatched hospitality and warmth. However, terrorism originating from within Afghanistan continues to pose a significant threat to both our nation and the broader region. Regrettably, the TTP, Fitna al-Khawarij, continues to target innocent civilians in Pakistan, thereby threatening our citizens and undermining their human rights. We therefore urge the Afghan interim authorities to honor their commitments under international law and the Doha Agreement and ensure that Afghan territory is not used for terrorist activities against neighboring countries. A stable and peaceful Afghanistan is essential for peace and development of the entire region.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Australia.
Thank you, President. We thank the Special Rapporteur for his latest report and all panellists for their contributions. The situation in Afghanistan is disturbing. The Taliban has effectively erased women and girls from public life, denying access to education, employment and freedom of movement. Australia is deeply concerned by your findings that the Taliban's institutionalised system of discrimination, oppression and domination amounts to crimes against humanity. Survivors of violence, particularly women and girls, have no recourse to fair or independent legal remedies, legal representation or protection mechanisms, allowing perpetrators of violence to act with impunity. Australia is deeply committed to supporting accountability for human rights abuses and violations in Afghanistan. In 2024, Australia joined with Canada, Germany and the Netherlands to invoke Afghanistan's responsibility under international law for violations of the rights of women and girls, a global first for action of this kind. We call on Afghanistan to comply with its obligations under international law and end its systemic campaign of gender-based discrimination, segregation and violence against women and girls. What more can the international community do to ensure accountability for the Taliban's actions? Thank you.
Merci, je donne la parole.
Thank you, and I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Kuwait.
شكرا سيد الرئيس.
Thank you, President. The delegation of Kuwait has read the report of the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in Afghanistan. My delegation is deeply concerned at the ongoing deterioration of the situation in Afghanistan. There are severe restrictions imposed on women and girls, including depriving them of education, jobs, and participation in public life. This is on top of suffering that has been endured by the Afghan people due to humanitarian and economic crises. The human rights situation in Afghanistan will require a comprehensive approach based on respect for the rule of law and participation by all segments of society, especially women and girls, in the development process. In this regard, my delegation will continue to support the Afghan people, and this is part of our constant efforts to mitigate their suffering and improve living conditions in key sectors such as education, health, and nutrition. Finally, we call for collective international action to promote independent action of the OHCHR in Afghanistan. We must urge the de facto authorities in Afghanistan to abide by their obligations under international human rights law, to stop all discrimination against women and girls. They must open up the way for international civil society to promote human dignity. Thank you.
Merci, je donne la parole.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Montenegro.
Mr. President, we remain deeply concerned about the unabated acute human rights and humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan, in particular the unrelenting severe oppression of women and girls. As reported, the Taliban have transformed the legal and judicial system to enforce, entrench and sustain the group's ideological, repressive and misogynistic model of governance, and to solidify their control over all of Afghan society. We strongly condemn a widespread, systematic and institutionalized system of extreme gender-based discrimination and exclusion of women and girls under Taliban rule. This may amount to gender-based prosecution, a crime against humanity under the Rome Statute, or gender apartheid, as increasingly termed. Special Rapporteur, you make clear prospects for achieving justice inside the Taliban-controlled Afghanistan are virtually non-existent. You therefore point to international mechanisms as the only currently available avenues to hold the Taliban accountable and to keep alive the hope of justice for Afghan women and girls. This includes the arrest warrants requested by the ICC for gender-based persecution and the launch of the Accountability Initiative under the CEDAW Convention, which Montenegro has also supported from the beginning. Montenegro reiterates its firm support to the Special Rapporteur's mandate, as well as to ANAMA and other UN mechanisms in Afghanistan. Thank you.
Merci, je donne...
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of France. Mr. Special Rapporteur, nearly 4 years after the Taliban came to power by force, the situation of Afghan women has only deteriorated. France aligns with the EU statement and thanks you for your work, which documents the systematic violations that women and girls in Afghanistan are suffering at the hands of the Taliban. They cannot take public transport alone. They are obliged to hide their faces, and this deprives them of their voice and is dehumanizing. In addition to the ban on access to medical training, women are suffering many other violations. France strongly condemns this dehumanizing and reprehensible policy against women and girls. This could be characterized as gender-based persecution, constituting a crime against humanity. This is why France and 5 other countries referred the situation to the International Criminal Court in November 2024. No return to normal will be foreseeable without an immediate and full cessation of these violations, as called for by Resolution 2593 of the Security Council. France supports any initiative to bolster the fight against impunity. Given the stubbornness and obscurantism of the Taliban, France stands in solidarity with Afghan women and will continue its cooperation with the UN and NGOs. Mr. Bennett, what, in your view, are some ways to strengthen the fight against impunity? Thank you. Thank you, says the Chair, and I give the floor to the Republic of Korea.
The President, the Republic of Korea thanks the Special Rapporteur for his comprehensive report and continue the dedication. We remain deeply concerned about the systematic discrimination and oppression Afghan women and girls continue to face. Their access to education, employment, health care, and freedom of movement is severely restricted, especially excluding them from public life. We are particularly troubled by the report's conclusion that Taliban-controlled justice system serves as a tool for further institutionalization of gender-based discrimination and domination, dismantling productive laws and institutions, reinstating corporal punishment for so-called moral offenses, and excluding women from the legal representation and due process show a system that reinforces discrimination rather than provides protection. Despite these restrictions, Afghan women, human rights defenders, and civil society continue to speak out with courage. As we mark the 30th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, we are reminded of our collective responsibility to defend women's rights and amplify their voices. Mr. Special Rapporteur, what forms of international support and cooperation would be most effective in helping Afghan women and girls reclaim access to justice and protection? I thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Belgium.
President, Belgium aligns with the EU statement and thanks the Special Rapporteur for his report and the women human rights defenders for their important contributions. The crackdown on Afghan human rights defenders, journalists, lawyers, protesters, civil society activists and minority groups continues. The rollback on women's rights in Afghanistan is unprecedented, effectively erasing women from public life. As your report points out, these human rights violations are met with impunity in a hostile legal system that is weaponized by the Taliban to oppress women, girls, LGBTQI+ persons and their allies. Belgium reminds that Afghanistan is a state party to CEDAW and should respect the rights this convention guarantees to women and girls. My country looks forward to the upcoming review by the CEDAW committee. The situation in Afghanistan is also a litmus test for international commitments on gender equality, on accountability, and also regarding the Women, Peace and Security agenda. We all know that women's participation in peace processes and the economy is deeply interlinked with their involvement in political life and decision-making, and this should also apply to Afghan women. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Indonesia.
Thank you, Mr. President. We took note of our report on restriction of access to justice and protection for women and girls in Afghanistan. We remain deeply concerned by the continued derogation of human rights in Afghanistan, which disproportionately affect women and girls, suspension of laws and regulations that once safeguarded their rights, and imposition of discriminatory policies that severely limit their participation in public life. We urge the de facto authority to reverse these regressive practices. Ensuring women's access to justice and their representation within legal system is essential to building an inclusive and just society. Mr. President, we are also alarmed that WFP's nutrition program this year faced a 60% cut, leaving over 30,000 women and children suffering from acute malnutrition without assistance. As basic rights, food, health, and education serve as a strong foundation for Afghan women and girls to claim all their rights and secure a better future. Indonesia remains committed to the empowerment of Afghan women and girls, including through provision of educational scholarships. We will continue to support the restoration of fundamental rights of Afghan women and girls, as well as the whole people of Afghanistan. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. President. Special Rapporteur, we welcome your dedication to highlighting the grave human rights situation in Afghanistan. The UK fully supports your mandate. As you have outlined, as we approach the 4th anniversary of Taliban rule, women and girls are denied their right to education, employment, freedom of movement and expression. Discrimination against so many is compounded by the lack of accessible, affordable and impartial judicial institutions. The Taliban must reverse these inhumane restrictions to ensure a brighter future for all Afghans, including minorities such as LGBT+ individuals and people from ethnic Hazara communities. 23 million Afghans are in need of humanitarian assistance. The UK continues to provide assistance, working with the UN and others. We remain committed to working constructively with Afghanistan for an Afghanistan at peace with itself, its neighbours and the international community. Afghanistan cannot achieve long-term stability and prosperity while half its population is systematically excluded from society. The international community must remain united in ensuring accountability and in urging the Taliban to change direction. Special Rapporteur, what are the short and long-term consequences of this erosion of justice for Afghan society as a whole? Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Czechia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Czechia aligns itself with the EU statement. We thank the Special Rapporteur for his comprehensive and deeply concerning report. The systemic dismantling of Afghanistan's legal and institutional frameworks has rendered justice inaccessible, particularly for women and girls. Justice and access to justice are fundamental rule of law elements. Denial of justice undermines trust in the institutional framework. It is the state's key role to ensure justice and accountability for human rights violations in line with its international legal obligations. Human rights of the individual holder must be in the center of the system of justice, and no concept, not even the family honor, can surpass it. We urge Afghanistan to hold the perpetrators of human rights violations accountable and ensure that women are guaranteed the right to a fair trial. Czechia supports the establishment of an independent investigative mechanism with a comprehensive mandate to document and address violations and abuses of international human rights and humanitarian law. Mr. Special Rapporteur, how do you see Afghanistan's prospects for achieving the path to stability and democracy and a resilient and democratic governance structure? I thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Qatar.
Thank you, President. At the outset, we wish to thank the Special Rapporteur for his efforts and take note of his report presented to the Council. Afghan people suffered for decades from conflicts, natural disasters, and from terrorism. Afghanistan is currently facing social, humanitarian, political, and economic challenges, which in its turn affect protection and enforcement of human rights. Countering these challenges requires further efforts in order to engage with all Afghan stakeholders in order to reach resolutions that achieves development and stability. Qatar lived up to its commitment as an international partner through mediations and through hosting, together with the UN, meetings of special envoys on Afghanistan in order to reinforce international consensus on various key issues. Add to that Qatar's humanitarian support in order to alleviate humanitarian suffering of Afghan people. In the same light, Qatar was keen to include human rights issues in its negotiations with Afghan partners, particularly support women's participation in peacemaking and peacebuilding, and ensuring their right to education and labor, and ensuring the rights of all Afghanis. In closing, we call upon the international community to provide technical and financial resources and to finance a humanitarian response plan in order to ensure dignity for Afghanis. And thank you.
Give the floor to Ireland.
Ireland aligns with the statement of the EU, and we thank the Special Rapporteur and all the speakers for sharing their experience. The presentations provide an abhorrent description of the situation facing women and girls due to the Taliban's actions, which overtly aim to undermine access to justice and protection. We are appalled by the Taliban's continued attack on women and girls' human rights, including access to education, employment, health and justice. This continued targeting of women and girls by the Taliban may amount to gender persecution, a crime against humanity under the Rome Statute. The Taliban's ongoing pursuit to undermine the human rights of marginalised communities is unacceptable. This includes the targeting of the Hazaras, members of the LGBTIQ+ community and other vulnerable groups. Ireland condemns in the strongest terms the Taliban's ongoing gross, widespread and systematic human rights abuses in Afghanistan, and we call for accountability of those who are responsible. We also call on the Taliban to ensure the immediate reversal of all decrees undermining the inalienable human rights of Afghans, including the rights enshrined in the CRC and CEDAW, to which Afghanistan is a state party. Special Rapporteur, how best can the international community support efforts to ensure justice and accountability in Afghanistan? Thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to Switzerland. Thank you very much. Switzerland would like to thank the speakers for this morning and the Special Rapporteur. We are still deeply concerned by the human rights situation in Afghanistan, which is marked by persistent institutionalized oppression. In particular, the rights of women and girls are still being systematically violated. Exclusion from public life, a ban on access to education and employment, as well as restrictions on freedom of movement. These discriminatory measures can be deemed to be gender-based persecution, as per the definition of international law. We categorically condemn public executions. The number of these has recently worryingly increased. These practices run counter to human rights and violate the absolute prohibition of torture and cruel, inhuman and degrading treatments which are incompatible with international law. We're also extremely alarmed by the continued shrinking of civil society, and that includes the suppression of critical voices, journalists, human rights defenders and civil society. Switzerland would call on the Taliban to put an end to these violations and respect international obligations and re-establish a safe, inclusive environment based on the rights of the entire population. Special Rapporteur, how do you envisage enhanced cooperation between your mandate and the United Nations Mission for Assistance in Afghanistan? Thank you very much. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Canada. Thank you very much. Canada warmly welcomes the report of the Special Rapporteur. Violence and discrimination on a persistent, systematic basis perpetrated by the de facto authorities in Afghanistan, including sexual violence and gender-based violence, are extremely concerning. The exclusion from women and girls from education, employment, political participation and the judiciary system is unprecedented. These measures constitute not only a flagrant violation of their fundamental rights, but also imperil peace and security on a long-term basis in Afghanistan. The alarming reports reflect gender-based violence, notably sexual violence in detention. These are cases that should be considered as a matter of urgency. All of the victims and all of the survivors of violations of individual rights require accountability and justice. We support international efforts to investigate and demand accountability from the authorities, including under the CEDAW Convention. We remain unwavering in our calls for the protection of protectors of human rights in Afghanistan who continue to plead for justice despite the huge risks to their life. Rapporteur, how can the international community support the documentation of gender-based crimes in Afghanistan? Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Japan.
Thank you, Mr. President, and all distinguished speakers for your powerful briefing. Japan remains deeply concerned about the human rights situation in Afghanistan, particularly institutionalized gender oppression faced by women and girls, the exclusion of women from the justice system and the resulting barriers to legal access have long been alarming. The Special Rapporteur further highlights that for vulnerable groups such as ethnic minorities, persons with disabilities and refugees, access to justice and protection is often completely out of reach. Japan expresses its deep concern over these multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination and underscores the importance of ensuring justice and protection for all Afghans. As noted in the report, civil society remains a vital source of hope. We are seriously concerned that many NGOs face growing restrictions, surveillance and arbitrary detention. The international community must stay engaged with Afghan people. The denial of education, economic hardship and social stigma are worsening the situation for women and marginalized groups. For its part, Japan will continue to provide support for returnees, internally displaced persons, maternal and child health services, and women's empowerment. We will continue to urge the Taliban to reverse its oppressive policies and reiterate our continued commitment to peace, stability, and human rights in Afghanistan. I thank you.
Merci.
Thank you very much. And I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Netherlands. You have the floor.
Do we have microphone for the Netherlands?
Yeah, now it works. Thank you, President. The Kingdom of the Netherlands aligns itself with the EU statement and thanks all speakers for their powerful interventions. The human rights situation in Afghanistan continues to deteriorate from an already disastrous level. Millions of Afghans are suffering daily. Since August 2021, we have witnessed systematic violations of human rights and discrimination of minority groups. In particular, Afghan women and girls have been systematically stripped of their most fundamental rights. The Special Rapporteur clearly points out in his report that the Taliban's policies of gender persecution have serious implications for women's access to justice. The basic right of equality before the law is not even respected. The systematic discrimination and exclusion of 50% of Afghan's population from all aspects of life has serious implications for Afghanistan's future. What will this future look like if women, for example, can't even go to a doctor? As the international community, we must continue to insist that Afghanistan adheres to its obligations under CEDAW, and we must continue to insist on the inclusion of the voices of women and girls in all aspects of Afghanistan's future. There can be no steps towards normalization of diplomatic relations without significant improvements in the human rights situation. Mr. Special Rapporteur, how do we ensure accountability for the serious human rights violations in Afghanistan? Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you very much. And I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Bulgaria.
Mr. President, Bulgaria aligns with the EU statement, and we thank the Special Rapporteur for his presentation. Bulgaria remains deeply concerned about the systematic human rights violations and abuses which continue to take place in Afghanistan. We are alarmed by the ongoing pursuance of measures and practices that strip women and girls in Afghanistan of their rights and fundamental freedoms, in particular the so-called law for the promotion of virtue and the prevention of vice. We call for the elimination of the institutionalized system of discrimination, segregation and exclusion of women and girls, which denies them the right to education, freedom of expression, movement, work and access to justice, and thus precludes their full, equal and meaningful participation in all spheres of public and political life in Afghanistan. Bulgaria joins others in condemning the continuing gender-based discrimination in Afghanistan, which may amount to persecution of women and girls on grounds of gender, a crime against humanity under the Rome Statute. Furthermore, we remain deeply concerned over the dismantling of key legal safeguards and institutions protecting children from violations and abuses of their rights. We therefore call upon the de facto authorities in Afghanistan to abide by the international obligations of the country, including those under the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women and the Convention on the Rights of the Child. I thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole.
Thank you very much. I'll give the floor to the distinguished representative of Malta.
Thank you, Mr. President. Malta aligns itself with the statement of the EU and thanks the Special Rapporteur for his report. Since the Taliban's return to power, women and girls have faced systematic exclusion from public life. Over 70 edicts and directives have been issued that severely restrict their rights to education, employment, freedom of movement and access to justice. We are alarmed by the dismantling of legal protections for survivors of gender-based violence and the closure of women's shelters. Access to justice is a cornerstone of human rights. A society that excludes half its population cannot prosper. The systematic denial of the human rights of women and girls in Afghanistan is not only a grave injustice, it is a barrier to any form of sustainable peace, stability or development. We call on the de facto authorities to restore women's and girls' access to justice and ensure their equal participation in all aspects of society. In conclusion, we reiterate our support for the Special Rapporteur and all other UN structures and mechanisms assisting Afghanistan. I thank you.
Merci.
Thank you very much. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of South Africa.
Mr. President, today is Youth Day in South Africa, where we commemorate the struggles waged by the students of 1976, many of whom were women and girls who took to the streets on the 16th of June, ushering in an unprecedented wave of protest over the decades that followed, which ultimately served to bring the apartheid state to its knees. In so doing, the women and girls of 76 were fighting for equality for women and girls, not only at home but everywhere. As such, South Africa cannot turn a blind eye to the cruel, inhuman and degrading treatment being borne by women and girls in Afghanistan, nor their valiant resistance on the front lines, which we are duty-bound to support. Already stripped of their human rights and fundamental freedoms, simply because they are women and girls, they are similarly being denied access to justice and protection as a tool to further institutionalize the widespread systematic gender-based discrimination and exclusion being perpetrated against them. This misogyny is intentional and as such may amount to the crime against humanity of persecution on grounds of gender. Accordingly, South Africa believes that those responsible must be held accountable. As part of this process, any accountability mechanism must, however, adopt a comprehensive approach covering both past and ongoing violations, building on the basis laid by HRC Resolution 57/3. I thank you.
Thank you very much, and I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Greece.
Thank you, Mr. President. Greece aligns with the EU statement and thanks the Special Rapporteur for his report. We remain gravely concerned by the continued erosion of fundamental rights in Afghanistan, particularly the systemic discrimination against women and girls and their exclusion from public life and justice mechanisms. This is a crime against the whole Afghan people and its future. As reflected in the report, access to justice for Afghan women is virtually non-existent, as discriminatory policies prevent them from approaching courts or legal institutions. Furthermore, the Taliban's restrictive policies have institutionalized gender-based discrimination in all aspects of life: education, movement, appearance, and participation. We stress the urgent need for a transitional justice process that is inclusive, survivor-centered, and grounded in international human rights law, a process that ensures full and meaningful participation of Afghan women and girls, regardless of ethnic or religious background, and developed in close cooperation with relevant UN mechanisms, including the OHCHR. We strongly support all efforts to explore international accountability avenues, to address serious violations, and to uphold the rights of Afghan women and girls. In this vein, the Council's role to maintain close monitoring of the situation and to ensure the protection of human rights in Afghanistan is crucial. I thank you.
Merci. Je passe la parole.
Thank you very much. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Romania.
Mr. President, Romania aligns itself with the EU statement and welcomes the speakers for their interventions today. We know the focus of the report presented that unfortunately lays bare the catastrophic erosion of the access to justice for Afghan women and girls under the Taliban regime. The erasure of Afghan women and girls from all spheres of public life continues unabated. Your report, Special Rapporteur, underscores well that the Taliban's justice system is a tool of systemic oppression, where all due process or form of transparency are lacking, and where laws, edicts and decrees are strictly directed at depriving women of their rights to education, healthcare, movement, legal protection or public participation. Challenging oppressing policies is met with public floggings, arbitrary detention, coupled with acts of torture and sexual violence. Romania stands firmly in condemning the Taliban's institutionalized and systemic discrimination of women and girls and echoes the global call to ensure proper pathways for accountabilities for the crimes committed. Special Rapporteur, while women face legal proceedings conducted entirely by men with no right to self-legal representation or appeal, do you see any specific safeguards or international interventions that could help mitigate these violations in the absence of functioning legal institutions in Afghanistan, without endangering the fragile civil society in the country? Thank you.
Merci. Je passe la parole.
Thank you very much. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Sierra Leone.
Sir President, we do not seek to take the floor this time.
Merci. Je passe la parole.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Thank you, Mr. President. The current prevailing challenges in Afghanistan are the legacy of endured years of extra-regional interference in this country. in consideration of human rights and long-lasting consequences. Afghan women and girls have been the primary victims of such situations that suffered the most and require proportionate attention the most. Bearing this in mind, we believe that the problems in Afghanistan does not limit to the situation of women and girls. A holistic approach to all dimensions of the current situation with consideration of root causes should be taken into account. Mr. President, Iran shares a historical neighbourhood enriched with deep cultural, linguistic and social ties with Afghanistan. All challenges in Afghanistan, mainly the destructive presence of foreign forces in Afghanistan during the last decades, had its spillover and continuous negative effect on Iran. For decades, we have kept our doors open to people of Afghanistan, and today around 5 million of them live in our country in a well-integrated manner in all segments of our society. The illegitimate and unjustified act of occupying Israel on starting war against Iran, attacking civilian areas, breaking food and water resources, and blindly killing innocent people is both impacting Iranian civilians and our...
Thank you. I'd remind delegates that you are invited to speak to the agenda item being discussed. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Chile. Thank you very much, President. We would like to thank the Special Rapporteur for the report and very much value the mandate being carried out to document rigorously the grave situation of human rights in Afghanistan. We're deeply concerned by the normative framework imposed by the de facto authorities. It is tantamount to a structure of domination over women and children with possible implications for crimes against humanity. The report shows how the state apparatus has been used to impose systematic restrictions, exclusion from public space of women, a ban on secondary and higher education, the dismantling of the Human Rights Commission and the denial of guarantees of due process. Chile reaffirms its commitment to substantive equality with a feminist feminist foreign policy which promotes the use of international law as a tool against institutionalized discrimination. We value the proposal to open a serious debate on how gender apartheid can be conceived legally. We recognize that this is something that can be used to effectively combat gender segregation. The international community cannot allow such structural, serious violations. The principles of universality of human rights require concerted and sustained response. In your experience, Mr. Special Rapporteur, what would be the technical and legal key elements which multilateral actors and states could consider to drive a possible codification of gender apartheid? Thank you very much. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Malaysia.
Malaysia thanks the Special Rapporteur for his report and aligns itself with the statement of the OIC. We reaffirm the importance of ensuring access to justice for all, especially for women and girls, including the rights to education, which is a fundamental